Good evening, everyone. Welcome to An Academy. In today's session, I'm going to have one more passage of Cat 90, one of the most difficult passages that appeared in slot 2 of 2019 Cat. This was a passage which not only perplexed students but also faculty members who took this exam. So let's start today's session. Have the detailed understanding of the passage and also understand the approach to tackle this kind of passage. In case you face this kind of tough passage, a cat as well, then what is the strategy you should adopt to deal with this kind of passages? Make most of the opportunity, right? So that's what we are going to discuss today. So before that, let me just give you a brief introduction of myself. My name is Neelam Malkani. I have around 12 years of experience of test preparation industry. I have trained students of CAT, GRE, GMAT, SAT, TOEFL and IIMs. I have also set and designed assessment papers of English and reasoning for various exams. For a brief period of time, I also served as an examiner of English for an international organization. Recently, I have authored a comprehensive book of English for the preparation of competitive exams. The book is written in both Hindi and English. This video is brought to you by An Academy, India's largest online learning portal for the preparation of competitive exams. Let me take you to its portal and tell you how you can be part of this learning process. You have to download An Academy Learning app. It will be shown 3 courses plus, free courses and special classes. If you want to attend classes for CAT, you have to go in the category of plus. When you go in the subscription, you will be shown all the features that you will be availing after subscribing to this course, such as 30 hours of live sessions every day. So once you subscribe, you will be able to see all these sessions which are delivered by top 14 educators of India. These educators have a wealth of experience of guiding and mentoring students in their respective fields. The courses which are delivered by these top educators are well structured and well designed. Every month, you get to see a new course being launched on An Academy. When you go in the subscription, you will be shown all the models of subscription which are devised to suit your needs and your plan of this exam. Want to prepare for CAT 20? You can go for 1 month subscription. If you're preparing for CAT 2021, you can go for 1 year subscription. Whichever model of subscription you choose, you will have to type code Neelam if you want to avail further 10% discount. Subscriptions are best in the industry as well as pocket friendly. National Scholarship Test, which is organized by An Academy every Sunday on the pattern of CAT. The recent changes which have been brought in CAT this year, the exam is going to be based on that. We'll have 3 sections. And once you take the test, you will be given detailed analysis of each section. You will be given your scale score as well as All India ranking. Other than these benefits, if you are one of the top 50 scorers of this test, stand a very good chance of winning Amazon voucher of rupees 5,000. So that's about An Academy. Let's start discussing the passage of today. So as I said, this was one of the toughest passages which appeared in CAT 2019. So I thought of taking the source of this passage as the sessions that I have been taking in this slot, discussing the passages of CAT 2019. I have been telling you the sources of these passages. 3 passages that I have discussed so far were taken from different newspapers. So one of the passages was taken from the Atlantic, another passage was taken from the newspaper Guardian, right? And third was taken from one of the websites of America, which is known for political and social affairs. So these were the sources of these passages. Now, today's passage was taken from a book, right? So the name of the book is Rethinking Third World Politics. The author is James Minor. There was a chapter dedicated to the proposal of colonial modernity. From that only this passage was taken up. Now, as we understood in earlier classes as well, that not entire part of the article is taken, or not whole article is taken up as the passage. Examiners pick and choose the parts of the passage from these articles and they take as a passage of the exam, right? So they do not take entire article. They take some part of the article in passages. Same was done with this chapter as well. So there was an excerpt from this chapter which was taken up by the examiner 2019, and some paragraphs were omitted, some paragraphs were taken up. Moreover, author also fiddled with the conclusion. The author concluded the paragraph in a different way, but examiner combined two different paragraphs and it did away with the conclusion that was actually originally drafted by the author. So that's how they try to make it very, very confusing. So sometimes if a passage seems disjointed, or a passage or a paragraph seems jarring, it does not resonate with you, or it does not seem fitting in context, happens because the examiner has done this, right? So don't start questioning your comprehension, don't start questioning your ability to understand something just because it might have been picked up by examiner in a specific way that has made this passage more complicated, right? So that actually happened with this passage. It seemed very difficult. It actually was very difficult because the examiner picked some parts, left out some parts, and that is why the coherence of the article was compromised. So now let's start with the reading of the passage. I'll give you 30 seconds for each slide. This passage had three paragraphs. What I have done is I have bifurcated each paragraph into two parts so that you can easily deconstruct the passage, assimilate the message, then we can go on and understand the question. Right? So this is the part first of first paragraph. I'll give you 30 seconds to read it and then I'll explain you everything what this passage or paragraph contains. Start. Right. So the passage starts with British colonial policy went through two policy phases, or at least there were two strategies between which its policy actually oscillated. We are told that Britishers adopted two key policies when they came to India, or at least they oscillated between these two policies. At least sometimes they adopted this and they sometimes adopted other policy. What these policies were. At first, the new colonial apparatus exercised caution. They were very careful when they started colonizing India and occupied India by a mix of military power and subtle diplomacy. So, the mix of these two policies. They were militarily aggressive, same time they were adopting subtle diplomacy. So, with diplomatic relationship or with diplomatic ties, they were trying to conquer India as well as along with using military power. These two powers, these two policies were used by Britishers to subjugate India. the high ground in the middle of the circle of circles. This, however, this policy, however, pushed them into contradiction. So because they adopted two different policies, military as well as diplomatic relationship, it led to some contradictions. For whatever their sense of strangeness of the country and thinness of the colonial presence, strangeness of the country, they were alien to the country, right? So they were not familiar with the territory, they were not familiar with the customs, so they were strangers to India. So strangeness of the country and thinness of colonial presence. So it was a very delicate situation. So they were altering between these two situations. The British colonial state represented the great conquering discourse of enlightenment rationalism. I boldface this part because this actually tells you what this policy was dictated by. So enlightenment rationalism here is signaling that policy or the ideology which dictated Britishers' policy, that they are enlightened. They are the people who are more evolved than Indians. They are the people who are more rationalized than Indians. And here lies their responsibility to rationalize other people or to enlighten other people. The white man's burden, right? So they felt that the light of enlightenment or the ray of enlightenment touched their land first, and hence now, since they are evolved, they are more intellectually advanced, they are more superior than other races. Hence, it is their responsibility to enlighten others. So, this is enlightenment rationalism, that instead of driven by the superstition, you can be advanced through rationalism. तो ये पूरी एक आइडियोलॉजी थी जिसने डिक्टेट किया उनकी इस पॉलिसी को कि उनको इनलाइटनमेंट रैशनलिज्म यानी जो जो कॉलोनीज जो पार्ट्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड वो कॉलोनाइज करने वाले हैं वहाँ पे उनको इनलाइटनमेंट करना है, लोगों को एडवांस करना है. So they represented the great conquering discourse of enlightenment rationalism entering India precisely at the moment of its greatest unchecked arrogance. This policy was at the peak of arrogance. They were so supremely confident about the implementation and the execution and the success of this policy that they became arrogant. That this is their authority to go and enlighten other people. Whichever country they are going to conquer, whichever country they are going to subjugate, they are going to enlighten them because they felt they have those intellectual powers, right? Arrogance, unchecked arrogance. So when they entered India, they were at the peak of their arrogance about this whole discourse. As inheritors and representative of this discourse, they were inheritors, Britishers or Europeans, as Britishers were inheritors of this discourse, which carried everything before it. This colonial state could hardly adopt for long such a self-denying attitude. They could not actually continue with this policy for a long time. So from the first part, the key takeaway from this first part of the first paragraph is that they adopted two policies. First, military aggression. Second, diplomatic relationship. It led to some contradiction, right? And second, enlightenment rationalism. They were dictated by discourse, and hence they felt that they have this obligation to enlighten the country they are going to colonize, right? Now, second part of this first paragraph. It had restructured everything in Europe. So this was the controlling idea. You can leave out the next part. The productive system, political regime, moral, cognitive orders. Everything, so these are the examples. With dash, author has given the example. They restructured everything in Europe and would do the same in India. So the policy which dictated restructuring of the Europe is going to do the same thing in India. Particularly as some empirically inclined theorists of that generation considered the colonies a massive laboratory of utilitarian or other theoretical experiments. तो जो उन्होंने यूरोप में किया वही वो इंडिया में करने वाले थे. Especially जो थ्योरिस्ट ये बिलीव करते थे कि जो कॉलोनीज हैं वो ब्रिटेन के लिए एक तरह से लेबोरेटरी है, जहाँ पे वो सारी अपनी थ्योरीज को एक्सपेरिमेंट कर सकते हैं, देख सकते हैं कि वो कितनी इफेक्टिव है, कितनी काम की है, एंड देन दे कैन रेप्लिकेट द सेम सिस्टम टू अदर कॉलोनीज. So that way, these colonies were nothing but laboratory for Britain, or empirically inclined theorists. We will understand what this word is. Look, don't let this word impede your understanding here, right? So go with the flow, understand the context well, and don't let this word serve as the stumbling block for your comprehension, right? So this is what it is, the massive laboratory of utilitarian or other theoretical experiments. Consequently, Parinam Swarup kya hua? The colonial state could not settle simply for eminence at the cost of its marginality. Now, Europeans were eminent. They were eminent, that means they were regarded, they were respected because they were white and they came from ruling class. So they were eminent. Same time, they were also marginal because they were very few in India, though they were in the ruling position, but they were still very few. So they were marginal. Same time, they were also marginalized because the customs and the rituals and the traditions they followed did not go well with Indians, right? So the modernity or the progressive attitude that they came with, it did not go down well with India, and hence they were marginalized. Because the majority of Indian people were still following the same rituals, same traditions, same customs. So, since though they were in the ruling position, yet they were marginalized, right? So, this is what the meaning of the sentence is. They could not settle simply for eminence, right? So, if they had settled for eminence, they could have gone with the thought that since they are in the ruling position, they don't have to make other people follow their customs or other people be modern, right? But they wanted other people to be modern so that they are not marginalized. Everybody is modern, right? It began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity into Indian society. They did not want to be marginalized. They did not want to be on fringe. Rather, they wanted to be inclusive of Indian society. They wanted to create an inclusive society, possibly. That's why they did not want to stand out because of their modern beliefs. They wanted to make entire country modern, right? So they started this modernity into Indian society. But this modernity did not enter a passive society. So they introduced the concepts of modernity, but it was not a passive society that they were dealing with. It was an active society. It was a resistant society. Sometimes its initiatives were resisted by pre-existing structural forms. So, since they were modern, they introduced some modern forms, but society was not passive. And sometimes, collectively, entire society resisted because it had structural forms. It was already conditioned. It was already in an entrenched way formed, right? So some deep-rooted system were already there in Indian society. So when they introduced these progressive systems or modern element, it faced a lot of resistance, right? Indian society resisted these changes because of its structural form, fixed form. Indian society was already fixed, rigid. Because of its structural form, it resisted those changes. At times, there was a more direct form of collective resistance. More collective resistance means people collectively resisted British forces for imposing modern values. Therefore, the map of continuity and discontinuity that this state left behind, the state means Britishers, left behind at the time of independence was rather complex and has to be traced with care. So, what they left, or when they left India at the time of independence, what was the continuous and what discontinued has to be treated with caution, has to be dealt with, right? So people resisted, and Sometimes they collectively resisted. इसलिए जब आप इस चीज़ का इवैल्यूएशन करें कि ब्रिटिशर्स जब इंडिया छोड़ के गए एट द टाइम ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस, क्या कंटिन्यू हुआ और क्या डिसकंटिन्यू हुआ, आपको ये ध्यान से देखना पड़ेगा, बिकॉज रेजिस्टेंस हुआ था। सारी चीज़ें उन्होंने जो इंट्रोड्यूस की थी वर नॉट एक्सेप्टेड, लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स वर रेजिस्टेड, right? So this is the sum and substance of first part of the paragraph stated the two key policies, military aggression and diplomatic ties, and enlightenment rationalism. That was a thought which dictated this thing. Second, Europe reconstruct war because of this whole thing, and same was the idea to do in India. So, because India was also a kind of laboratory for Britishers, as all colonies were, India was also one of the colonies, and it was treated as a laboratory to experiment different thoughts. And then we saw the statement simply for eminence at the cost of marginality. They didn't want to be marginalized. They didn't want themselves only to be seen as modern. Hence, they introduced the concept of modernity in India. Right? But this modernity was resisted because India was not a passive society, it was an active society. Sometimes collectively resistance was shown, and ऑथर इसलिए बोल रहा है कि इसलिए जब आप इवैल्यूएट करें एट द टाइम ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस ब्रिटिशर्स ने क्या छोड़ा, क्या कंटिन्यू किया, उसको आपको ध्यान से देखना पड़ेगा. सो दैट्स व्हाट इज द फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ. टू पार्ट 1, 30 seconds. All right. Now, second paragraph, first part says, most significantly, of course, initiatives for modernity came to assume an external character. तो ये मॉडर्निटी के जो कॉन्सेप्ट थे वो एक्सटर्नली इम्पोज किए गए थे. इंटरनली इंडियन सोसाइटी डिड नॉट इनिशिएट द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ मॉडर्निटी, didn't start from India within or from Indian people within. Rather, it was imposed by an authority which was controlling India, which was ruling India. The acceptance of modernity came to be connected ineradicably with subjection. Subjection means when you are ruled, subjugated. So, ineradicably, that means almost every time this idea of acceptance of modernity is with subjection. Since you are subject, since you are ruled by a foreign force, you have to accept the idea of modernity. You are not willingly accepting it. You are not wholeheartedly accepting it. You are accepting just because you are ruled and somebody else is ruling you, and you have to accept their wishes. So there was grudging acceptance. This again points to two different problems. One theoretical, other political. Theoretically, because modernity was externally introduced, same idea, it is explanatorily unhelpful to apply the logical format of the transition process. So when transition process happens, it happens within. You see some changes taking place in the society because it's happening organically, it's happening automatically, it's not imposed, it's not induced, rather it's happening um, independently without any force. Then only you can understand the transition process, right? So how people changed, what led to the change, and what is the outcome of the change. So this is what the transition process is. Authors saying that since this did not happen within the society, it was induced, it was externally introduced. Transition process cannot happen here. Such a logical format would be wrong on two counts, right? So here the sum and substance of this paragraph is that it was external in character. The change which happened in the society, or the modernity which was introduced to Indian society, was external in character. Right? So that is the overarching statement paragraph has. Rest are details, are secondary details that you can easily omit. But this is the overarching idea. I hope you understand the overarching idea is the controlling idea. Here, part 2 of paragraph 2. In 30 seconds, I'll explain. All right. So let's start from where we left the first part of the second paragraph. Such a logical format would be wrong on two accounts. First, however subtly, it would imply that what was proposed to be built was something like European capitalism. So ये ऐसा कहना गलत होगा. उससे पहले बोला it would be wrong on two counts. One, the situation in India was not similar to that of Europe. So in Europe, you had capitalism. In India, the economy was mixed, or there was different system which was there when Britishers came. Second, and in any case, historians have forcefully argued that what it was to replace was not like feudalism. So, what it was to replace, that means what was replaced in India was not feudalism. Feudalism did not exist in India. It was a system which existed in Europe. And Enlightenment did away with feudalism and a new system was restored. So that way, the situation is quite different from Europe. European capitalism and European feudalism both were not there in India, with or without modificatory adjectives. But more fundamentally, the logical structure of endogenous change does not apply here. More fundamentally, what happened in Europe was that European resisted against their own system, and they did away with feudalism and restored a more democratic system. Indigenous change. So what happened in Europe was indigenous change. That was not in India. Change was imposed by those forces which were ruling India. It was not indigenous change. So situation was quite different from that of Europe. It was not feudalism, indigenous change, capitalist economy. Right? Second, here transformation agendas attack as an external force. Transformation agendas. So that is, those agendas or agents who were bringing transformation were external forces. They were not Indian forces, they were Britishers. This externality is not something that can be casually mentioned and forgotten. So, ये कोई मामूली नहीं है. Then author states this, substantiates this. It is inscribed on everything, every object, every proposal, every legislative act, each line of casualty. Everything was externally forced. Everything is the testimony that the change of the element of modernity were externally induced. It comes to be marked on the epoch itself. Entire epoch, entire era in which Britishers ruled India is marked by these external changes. Changes which were introduced by external forces. This repetitive emphasis, the author calls it a repetitive emphasis because from second paragraph, second part, he has been emphasizing on one point that changes, the modernity was externally induced. This repetitive emphasis on externally should not be seen as a nationalist initiative. that is so well rehearsed in India's social science. Now, here, author takes an issue with what is propagated in Indian social science. What is taught in Indian social science is that because of these changes, we resisted Britishers and then it led to nationalist movement. That is what we are taught. That is what we are told. Author takes an issue with that. He's a foreigner and he says, not because of this the nationalist movement is started, possibly there were different reasons, right? So this is how he ends the paragraph. Now, you would be surprised to know that author ended this paragraph differently. The author of this book, author of this chapter, ended the paragraph in a different way, and he furthers this paragraph by talking about Indian historians. But this was taken away by examiner of CAT, and he introduced this paragraph. This was the fourth paragraph, right? But author has taken it as the first paragraph, third paragraph. The examiner has taken this as the third paragraph. All right. So I hope we are clear with the essence of paragraph 2. So the overarching statement is modernity came as the external force because we were subjugated. We did not actually accept it. Indians did not actually accept it, but because it was external. Second, it drew an analogy between what happened in Europe and what happened in India. So they were very unlike situations. Unlike Europe, India was not capitalist. Unlike Europe, there was no feudalism. Unlike Europe, endogenous changes did not happen in India. Endogenous means within, internally, not externally, right? Second, every element, every one statement, it comes to be marked on the epoch itself. Entire era is marked by this characteristic that all the changes were externally forced, right? Now, paragraph 3, last paragraph, and the shortest paragraph. All right. So quite apart from the externality of the entire historical proposal of modernity, some of its contents are remarkable. Author says they are exceptional. Economic reforms, or rather altercations, changes, the economic changes हुए, did not foreshadow the construction of a classical capitalist economy with its necessary emphasis on extractive and transport sector. So, जो economic reforms हुए, they did not foreshadow, that means could not see, they could not foresee the construction of a capitalist, classical capitalist economy. उन्होंने ये नहीं सोचा था कि finally India will become a capitalist economy with its necessary emphasis on extractive, that means you are exploiting natural resources, and transport sectors. So capitalist economy has these two important features, and it actually emerged in India later on. What happened was the creation of a degenerate version of capitalism. India became a capitalist country, but the form of capitalism that emerged in India was degenerate. That means that was inferior form of capitalism. It's not the sublime version of capitalism, rather it's a degenerate form of capitalism. Dash. That means it's going to explain it further. What early dependency theorists call the development of development. Because of this kind of capitalism, India became underdeveloped country. Because of this economic theory which emerged, it was the development of underdeveloped. Right? So India developed as the underdeveloped. This is how this paragraph ended, or this passage ended. So because of the elements of modernity which were introduced in India, India became an underdeveloped country. And in between that, I mean, that is what is the whole idea of the passage, that these modern elements, or the concept of modernity, was imposed, induced by Britishers, and Ultimately, it led to the creation of underdeveloped. In between that, there were a couple of details, there were a couple of substantiating. So I hope we are clear with the passage here. Yes, it was a tough passage written in a very convoluted language and with a lot of dense and complicated phrases. Imperialism and capitalism, utilitarian, couple of other words which if you get stuck at, you may lose the entire sense. But as I have already always stressed in my session that you have to take them in your stride, right? So you don't have to stuck on them. You have to gauge your meaning from the context, right? So you have to take the meaning in your flow. Invariably, the meaning that you interpret is going to be correct. But it always pays to be familiar with the meaning of these phrases. So after we are done with the discussion of questions, we will have a look at all these phrases and understand them, right? So in case you find these phrases in this year passages, you may not have any difficulty in understanding, right? So let's now look at the questions. Question number 1. All of the following statements, if true, could be seen as supporting the argument in the passage. So there is one overarching argument. All the modern initiative by the Britishers were externally imposed, right? They were imposed on India. So option 1, A. Modernity was imposed on India by the British and therefore led to underdevelopment. Now, this is very clearly supported, right? Because this is the argument which author started with and led to underdevelopment is the idea that author ended his argument with. So with this very clearly supported by the argument, by the passage. So that's eliminated because you have to choose the option which is not supported. The introduction of capitalism in India was not through the transformation of feudalism as happened in Europe. So at the beginning of third paragraph, we saw some differences between Europe and India. So how the situation was different from the situation of India. It was not capitalist, it was not feudalism, there was no feudalism in India and endogenous change, right? So this is also supported. The introduction of capitalism in India was not through the transformation of feudalism as happened in Europe. The change in British colonial policy was induced by resistance to modernity in Indian society. Now, the change in British colonial policy was induced by resistance to modernity in Indian society. Now, please understand this sentence clearly, because just because of one word, if you don't understand the meaning of one word, you can actually mark this as the correct answer, and then you will be wrong. The change in the British colonial policy was triggered, if you change this word and say triggered, by the resistance of Indian society, then you will possibly understand what this sentence, and then you will understand this is absolutely because the resistance was induced by change in British colonial policy. There was change in the British colonial policy that led to the resistance in Indian society. Indian society resisted because British colonial policy changed and it introduced the elements of modernity. Right? So this is just um, the disfigured version of this statement, right? Because of this word induced, you can be confused. But if you replace this word with triggered, led to, then you will understand what it means. This is what is the answer. Why not fourth? Throughout the history of colonial conquest, natives have often been experimented on by the colonizers. Yes. First paragraph says that by these utilitarian theorists or these give you this word utilitarian, empirically inclined theorist. So the word was empirically inclined theorist, right? They always considered their colonies as their laboratories, right? So whatever theories they came up with, they wanted to experiment with their colonies, and after getting the enough result, they would replicate the same thing on other colonies. So that's how their colonies were nothing but laboratories, these theorists. All right, so this is also supported by the passage. Third is the answer, that is not supported by the passage. Just the opposite of this statement is supported. Right? So this is how not only the passage was tough, but the creation of question was also very challenging. Number 2. All of the following statements about British colonialism can be inferred from the first paragraph except. Now, we can refer to the first paragraph, but it makes more sense if you eliminate at least two options and then you refer to the paragraph to confirm your answer between last two options that you are confused about, right? Because having all four options in your mind, if you refer to the paragraph, then possibly have not read the paragraph carefully or you have not understood the passage. So you better look at the options and then refer to the paragraph. It allowed the treatment of colonies as experimental sites. This is true. It can clearly be inferred because by empirically inclined theorists, the colonies were nothing but laboratories. So one is inferred. Second, it faced resistance from existing structural forms of Indian modernity. Now, look at this option. It faced resistance from existing structural forms. It has taken the language of passage and it makes you want to choose it because the same language you have read in the passage. So this is another eyewash by the examiner. It will take an option and takes the language as it is given in the passage just to induce you to choose that because you feel that this has been stated in the paragraph. But look at the word author has changed. Indian modernity faced resistance from existing structural forms of Indian modernity. Was Indian society modern society? Or were these modern elements introduced by Britishers? Right? I hope you understand it very clearly that India was not a modern society. Fixed structural forms, yes, that has been used, but it was not a modern. So B is the answer. Let's see why C, why D is. Was at least partly an outcome of Enlightenment rationalism. First paragraph very clearly stated that this policy was dictated by Enlightenment rationalism, right? So they wanted to make other colonies modern because they felt they are more enlightened, they are more evolved, and now it's the onus is on them to make other societies modern and progressive. So that way, Enlightenment rationalism, right? So they wanted to eradicate superstition and the other backward thinking and replace it with the thinking which is based on reason. So that way, yes, also correct. Was at least partly shaped by project of European modernity. Yes. Everything changed in Europe. First paragraph, first paragraph. Second part of first paragraph, it had restructured everything in Europe. Productive system, political regime, moral, cognitive orders. Right? So that is, answer is second. Because of one word, Indian modernity, this option. Right? Which of the following observation is a valid conclusion to draw from the author's statement that the logical structure of endogenous change does not apply here? When he compared Indian society with European society, he brought three things. He said that India was not this change which happened in India was not endogenous. Here transformation agendas attack as an external force. Right? So what conclusion can be drawn from this statement? Right? Now let's look at the options. The transformation of Indian society did not happen organically but was forced by colonial agendas. Let's hold it. It appears to be correct because this is what actually means. Endogenous, we understood, something which starts within, something which happens because of its innate structure, right? Rather than externally forced or externally imposed. Second, Indian society is not endogamous. Now, wordplay. How cleverly author has given a word similar to endogenous, so that you get confused and you opt out for a wrong option. Indian society is not endogamous. It is more accurately characterized as aggressively exogamous. Two different words, completely different from endogenous. Gamous, I hope you understand. We did this root in our root word class where we discussed a lot of words with etymology technique. So, gamy stands for marriage, monogamy, bigamy, polygamy. This is endogamy. So endogamy, exogamy. So endogamy is getting married within your tribe, within your own social group, right? Not marrying to a person who is outside your social group or outside your ethnic group, right? So that is what is endogamy. So tribes are endogamous in India. So that way they get married only in their restricted group. Exogamous, getting married away from your social group or your ethnicity or your community. So exogamous, endogamous, nowhere contextually fitting in the passage, eliminated. C, the endogenous logic of colonialism can only bring change if it attacks and transforms external forces. First of all, only, always, never, all. Whenever you have these words in an option, always treat them with caution because these words make an option extreme in nature. Invariably, the options are incorrect. Unless such extreme views are supported in the passage, you should not choose option. So only is making it wrong. Other than that, if you read the statement carefully and you understand its essence, it actually says this logic of colonialism can only bring in change if it attacks and transforms external forces. External forces, right? So external forces can be transformed, whereas the passage talked about the modern values which were imposed by external forces, right? Completely out of context. D. Colonized societies cannot be changed through logic. They need to be transformed with external force. This is not what author means here. Endogenous, he says that what happened in Europe, it was an endogenous change. What happened in India was not endogenous change because the change was imposed by an external force. In Europe, people resisted that system which exists there, which prevailed there, right? So that was an endogenous change. They resisted against the feudalist structure, right? Here, D is also not very clearly, yes, right? 4. 4 is structure-based question. It is testing your ability to understand the structure of the organization of the passage in the paragraph. So what is it that first paragraph says and what is the outline of the second paragraph and how it can be summarized in one word maybe, right? So which one of the following 5 word sequence best captures the flow of the argument? The flow of the argument is nothing but the organization of the passage. So what is stated in the first paragraph, what is stated in the second paragraph, or consequently, chronologically, what is stated in all 3. Now let's look at all options here. First is colonial policy, that's all right. So first paragraph talks about colonial policy. Arrogant rationality, yes. He said that it came in India at the time of arrogant rationality. Okay, so resistance and then independence. So this word is definitely making it incorrect because this has not been talked about, right? independence and development. So they are, development is not talked about, underdevelopment, development of underdevelopment, and independence is out of context. First option is incorrect. First paragraph talks about military power. Yes, military power with diplomatic power. So both. First is fine. The option, first part is fine. Second, colonialism. Again, so sequence is disturbed. Restructuring, so that's also not there. So B is also eliminated. C, colonial policy, yes. Enlightenment, yes. It talked about enlightenment, rationality, right? External modernity, if you remember, third paragraph talked about modernity, right? Then subjection, because it was forced, and it was forced by a ruling power. It was always taken as the subjection, because Indians were in subjugation of Britishers, right? And then it led to the development of the development. C, the correct option, which represents the sequence of the argument, the chronology of the development, the idea author ended his paragraph with. Military power, arrogance, fine. Laboratory, again changes. Modernity, capitalism. Modernity, exactly what modernity, right? External modernity will be the right word. Capitalism, again changes the sequence. So, answer is C. So this is about, understanding the whole skeleton of the paragraph, right? So what was stated in the first paragraph, what if there is a word which represents that entire paragraph, what that word would be. That way, you had to have clarity of the, you had to gather the clear understanding of entire passage. Question number 5. Consequently, the colonial state could not settle simply for eminence at the cost of its marginality. First paragraph, read this line. It began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity into Indian society. So as I said, this sentence, I explained this sentence then and there only. So which of the following best captures the sense of this statement, right? So marginality, when you are marginalized, you are on the fringe, you are on the margins, you are not integrated to the mainstream of the society. So we call those sections marginalized. Sometimes we call poor. Sometimes we call those backward section people, the marginalized section. Sometimes we call farmers marginalized because they are not integrated into the mainstream of society, mainstream of economy. So that way they are marginalized, right? They are at margins, they are not at the core. Second, eminence. Eminence is you're prominent, or you are known, you're regarded, you're respected. So Britishers, since they were from ruling class, they were eminent, regarded, they were respected. At the same time, they were marginalized because the values and the system or the tradition they followed were not followed by majority of Indians. Why? Not followed by Indian society at all. So they felt marginalized, as if they were modern, but they were in minuscule proportion. They were the minority, right? The rest of the society was not following what they were following. They felt marginalized, right? So hence they tried to impose their values of modernity on. Now, having gathered this understanding again, let's look at the options and try to develop our answer. The colonial enterprise was a costly one, so to justify the cost, it began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity in Indian society, taking this phrase literally at the cost of. This option is taking the meaning of this phrase literally at the cost of. It's actually not taking the cost. It's actually saying that उसकी कीमत पे वो eminent होना चाहते थे, but not at the cost of being marginalized, right? इस कीमत में नहीं कि उनको marginalize किया जाए. They wanted to be among Indian society, right? They wanted to look like other people of Indian society, right? So that way, this is the sense. A is outrightly eliminated. The colonial state felt marginalized from Indian society because of its own modernity. Therefore, It sought to address that marginalization by bringing its modernity to change Indian society. This captures the essence of this entire statement. This Britishers felt marginalized because of their own modernity. Hence, they decided to impose this value of modernity on Indian society so that they could be integrated. Right? They don't look alien. They don't look foreign. Right? See, why not? See, the cost of the colonial state's eminence was not settled. Therefore, it took the initiative of introducing modernity into Indian society. Cost was not settled. Again, it's taking this phrase literally, whereas the figurative sense of this phrase is used in this sense. The colonial state's eminence was unsettled. The cost was unsettled. See, the eminence was unsettled by India, by its marginal position. Therefore, it developed Indian society by modernizing it, taking the literal meaning of this phrase, right? And all the options are incorrect, right? So I hope now we have some clarity of the passage. And yes, it was a tough passage. It was very, very dense, jargon-filled passage. But you have to understand where this passage came from, right? Since this book was written by those people who are exclusively interested in history, that too colonial history, right? And the book is meant for those who are academically inclined, who are possibly doing some kind of research for their own journals, for PhDs, or for their own thesis, and that is why they would read a book like this. Or those people who are very scholarly in nature. The language itself, you can understand jargons, the phrases author is using. He assumes that his readers already understand all these things, right? And that is why he does not take any explanation. He does not give any explanation of these phrases. If the book had been written by a layman or the book had been written by common people, he would have used common phrases, he would have used some understandable phrases in order to widen the understanding of his. But he has possibly written this book only for a specific audience. That is why he has taken this liberty, very erudite expression, as well as choice of his. So, from the style of the language or from the style of writing, you can understand what the author's profession be or what kind of audience he is addressing, who he is writing for, right? So that way, sometimes the questions which appear that what is possibly the profession of the author or what audience he is addressing to, sometimes you will face these kind of questions well after the passages. So you will have to understand the style as well as the kind of argument he puts up in this passage that gives you the reflection of his audience as well as which profession he comes from. When he writes an article for a newspaper, he would want greater understanding of his audience. He would want more and more people to read it, more and more people to understand it, because he would focus on the readability and the understandability of his article. Otherwise, his article will not be read and he possibly won't get another assignment. So that way, he is going to make his language lucid and explicit. But if he already knows that this journal is not going to be read by a common man, by a layman, by a person who is not specifically interested in that domain, then he can take the liberty of being very scholastic in his narrative. He would use jargons, he would use those verbiage which are confined to that phrase only. Just this passage. Couple of phrases which are beyond us, which are beyond our comprehension, right? If we had not understood them in the context, we possibly missed the whole idea, right? So now let's move on and talk about some phrases which have been used. I hope these phrases will be helpful to you if you encounter some similar passage or See, these passages are very common to literature, art, and philosophy. So, if you encounter passages on these subjects, invariably you will also encounter these phrases. So, these will be helpful to your understanding as well as to your accuracy. The first word that I have picked up, passive. So, you remember this word was used in the passage when he said that it did not face a passive society. Used in a way, instead of saying India was an active society, he said that it was not a passive society. Passive is accepting what happens or what people do without trying to change anything or oppose them. Right? So when you do something passively, you're not actively participating. Right? You are accepting whatever is happening to you without resisting, without revolting, or without any kind of disapproval. Look at the example. He played a passive role in the relationship. Passive role in the relationship, that means he was not actively involved in the relationship. Whatever was happening in that relationship, it was just kind of inactive receptor, right? A passive observer of events. So he was not commenting, he was not participating, he was just observing, and he was a passive observer. So that way you understand the passive. Passive is not actively involved, right? So when you do something passively, you're not involved in that activity. Ineradicable. Eradicate, I hope all of you understand what eradicate is. Eradicate is to root out something, is to eliminate something, to eradicate poverty, to eradicate corruption, to eradicate polio from India, right? So this word time and again comes in our vocabulary list as well as in some vocabulary questions. Ineradicable. So this is a very academic word which is used with some flair by the author here. Ineradicable, that cannot be removed or changed, right? Look at the sentence. The slave trade had an ineradicable effect on world history, right? So what happened in US, possibly this world, this sentence is talking about what happened in US. So slave trade that happened in US has an ineradicable effect on world history. So it had some monumental effect on world history. Because of it, there are some effects that cannot be removed. Some experiences in early life have ineradicable effects. So even when you are in your formative age or when you are adult, certain things that you experience as a child will linger on your adulthood as well, right? That way, those experiences will shape your personality, shape your later life as well. You can understand in Iran. Subjection. So there is a king, there is a subject. Right? So king is in the ruling position, subject is what is ruled by the king. So subject, praja, just for a moment. That's a samajhna. So subjection is the state of being under the political control of the country or state. We were in the subjection of Britishers or the English. So that way you understand this subjection. Hong Kong has been in the subjection for a long time. So in the subjection, the book discusses the political subjection of the island by its larger neighbor. So an island which was under the subjection of its larger neighbor, right? So small tiny island which is subjugated by a large neighboring island, right? So controlled, dominated. Subjection is nothing but when you are controlled, you're dominated by a bigger force, right? India was the colony of Britishers. That was in the subjection, right? Enlightenment. Okay, so though I mean I can have entire class on this word or this movement or whole development which marked a different era in Europe as well as in the entire world. But just to cut it short and just to make you understand, meaning of this word is how we understand enlightenment in India is Punajarvan. So in 18th century or the early 19th century, when we started following some principles which were not based on the bigotry, dogmatic principles of religion. Rather, we started to see reason, started to see the advancement of science, started to see uh, the negative effects of superstitions, right? So that is the whole era of enlightenment. Just read it out and possibly with that you understand. It's the enlightenment also known as the age of reason. तो आपने जब superstition अंधविश्वास को छोड़ के reason पे focus करना शुरू, reason is logic, was an intellectual and cultural movement in the 18th century that emphasized reason over superstition and science over blind faith. So whatever we were taught by the religion, we followed that blindly. So that was blind faith. It was not supported by science. It was not supported by reason, right? So our instinct could not believe certain things, but we believed because we were taught to follow that by our religion, right? So in this period, in this era, people started challenging those superstitions norms, those dogmatic beliefs imposed by church or other religious institutions. So this was the time when people started believing their own reason, their own intellectual power. So that was the period Enlightenment. Using the power of the press, Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Isaac Newton, and Voltaire questioned accepted knowledge, spread new ideas about openness. Openness, that means whatever is taught to me, whatever is told to me, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to question that. I'm not going to investigate that. So openness. And the person who is giving me, who is sermonizing me, should be open to my questions. So openness. Investigation. I'm going to search for the truth. I'm not going to accept the truth which is told to me. I'm going to accept that. I'm going to investigate that. And religious tolerance throughout Europe and the America. It started in the Western world. Many consider the Enlightenment a major turning point in Western civilization. It is taught as one of the eras. So it is marked as one of the eras which is characterized for all these things. Age of light replacing an age of darkness. Right? So enlightenment, in order to understand the same context in India, you can understand Punarjagran. Right? So that is also era where we started questioning our dogmatic beliefs. Rationalism, so author has also used this term. Rationalism is the idea that humans are capable of using their faculty of reason to gain knowledge. Right? So they started believing in their own intellect. They started realizing the potential of their own intellectual powers. So that is what is rationalism. This was a sharp turn away from the prevailing idea that people needed to rely on scripture or church authorities for knowledge. Right? So this was a kind of liberation from those dominating forces of or religion or these clerics. So they had supreme power. They had the monopoly of emanating knowledge or spreading knowledge. So they were the only people who could read scripture and tell other people what is written in these scriptures. They were the only people who could decipher the knowledge written in these scriptures and interpret them for other people. And we were at the mercy of these people. But rationalism was realizing your own intellect, that you can also read and understand what is written in these scriptures. Right? So that way, rationalism is led to the Enlightenment. Right? So they are very closely intertwined. So rationalism, when people started thinking that they themselves have this power, they are not heavily dependent, or they should not be heavily dependent on clerics for the interpretation of scripture. Rather, they can read, they can understand, and they can interpret it. So when they started realizing this, it led to the Enlightenment. Feudalism. So the societal system or a social system that existed during the Middle Ages in Europe, in which people were given land and protection by a nobleman, had to work and fight for him. So this whole system existed in Europe, and there were a lot of feud who existed in Europe. There was a nobleman who worked in the court of a king. So this nobleman had different feud. So what he did was he gave a piece of land to feud, and this man was supposed to give him protection and was supposed to support with him with his army. So he had to maintain certain, army men, and whenever this nobleman needed, he had to give this all these resources to the nobleman. In return, he was given a piece of land, collection of texts, the maintenance of that land was the responsibility. So this led to a very rigid system which actually propagated inequality in the system, right? So this was toppled after the Enlightenment. This was kind of subverted, and capitalist system and a kind of democratic system prevailed after this whole system was done away with. So feudalism existed in Europe. So here in passage, author is drawing analogy between the system which existed in Europe and India. So he said it was a feudalistic society, India was not a feudalistic society. So empiricism, so empirical or empiricism is the idea that promotes that knowledge comes from experience and observation of the world. Empirically inclined theorists, right? So those theorists who believed that whatever theory they are propounding or they are coming up with, that has to be experimented with set of people. They took these colonies as their laboratories. So whatever their thought experiment was, whatever their thought process was, they tried to experiment on the colonies. India was one of its colonies, India was one of its laboratories. So empiricism is when you try to prove everything with experiment, right? Endogenous, as I've already explained you, that is something which comes within, having a cause that is inside itself. So endogenous. So money is endogenous to the economy. So economy thrives on money. If there is no money, economy cannot exist, right? So that is endogenous. So that exists because of this. Now another meaning which is related to medical terms, that is found or coming from within something. For example, a system of a person's body or mind. Let's look at the example. Endogenous insulin levels decrease over time in people with type 2 diabetes. So the insulin level, which is intrinsic in people's body, that is not externally injected in their body, but something which their body forms out of these physiological processes, right? So that way, endogenous is something which is produced by your body, and second meaning is something having a cause that is inside it. So endogenous nahi tha structure. So author said that endogenous change nahi tha India mein, it was forced by a foreign force, right? Just opposite of endogenous is exogenous. Exogenous is outside. This causes. So here it was an exogenous causes. What author has proposed was an exogenous cause. Foreshadow is to be a sign of something that will happen in the future, right? His sudden death had been foreshadowed by earlier health scares. So here it was indicated. So here author used this word to foreshadow capitalist. He said that the reform which happened in economic reforms did not foreshadow the formation of this kind of classic capitalist economy. It was not a sign, but ultimately India became a degenerated capitalist society, capitalist economy. Foreshadow is to be a sign of future. These measures were foreshadowed in last year's health committee report, right? So you can understand foreshadow is something which indicates what is going to happen in future, right? So when we have budget, just before that we have economic survey of India. Economic survey of India is a foreshadow of the budget, right? So it in a way indicates what is going to happen in budget. Right? Extractive economy. Extractive is based on exploitation. It's based on exploiting. So relating to the process of removing or obtaining something, especially mineral, right? So extractive industry. So capitalist economy is based on extractive industries, because those industries which are going to extract natural resources or making money. The people, companies, and activities involved in removing oil, metals, coal, stone from the ground. So they are also part of extractive economy or extractive industry or sector. Okay. So utilitarian, designed to be useful and practical rather than attractive. So anything which is designed with the purpose of serving a specific objective, not for looking good or not for its aesthetic appeal, rather only for serving a specific purpose or an objective, fulfilling an objective. Her clothes were utilitarian, unlike the elaborate dresses the other girls were wearing. Here you can understand the word meaning. Utilitarian, which is specifically for a purpose. This chair has a utilitarian purpose. That means it is used for sitting. When you try to make it aesthetically pleasing, so you possibly compromise with its utilitarian purpose. It doesn't need to be aesthetically pleasing or beautiful to look at. It has to be utilitarian. That means it should serve a specific purpose. The old hospital was demolished in 1911 and replaced with a much more utilitarian building. So that way the building, which is not very attractive, it's not aesthetically pleasing, but rather serving the purpose of being in hospital, right? That way you can understand what utilitarian. Now the meaning of utilitarian in philosophy is that the morally right decision is the action that produces most good. In order to please everyone, you have to do something which is morally correct or which is most righteous and that situation. That is another meaning of utilitarian, which is used in philosophy, right? So, yeah, so here I come to the end of today's discussion. I hope I explained this passage to you, and now it's clear that this passage meant and how you can approach these passages if they come. Yeah, so if you face this kind of passage this year as well, a passage which you cannot make head and tail of, or is very jargon filled, or which is very dense and written in a very convoluted language, if you encounter this kind of passage, try to understand the big picture. Don't get bogged down by the details. The details are not going to give you the answer. Details can always be referred back when there is a specific question asking you to look at details and answer it. If you understand the bigger picture, you'll be able to do some questions. 3 questions out of 5 questions you'll be able to do right if you have understood the main idea, if you have understood the bigger picture. So now you might have noticed that some of the parts of this passage I left out. I did not read those parts, I did not focus on those parts. Nonetheless, we understood the passage clearly because we understood the bigger picture, right? Other than bigger picture, in these kind of passages, try to look at the sentences which are indicating author's opinion, right? So when he signals certain statements through which he indicates what he opines about the topic, those sentences are very, very important to look at. If you understand what author's opinion on that issue is, solving the question is going to be far easier. Alright? If you face these kind of passages, what you have to see is what the main idea is, what the bigger picture is. Leave the example, leave supporting details, leave extraneous detail, leave statistics. All these things can be referred to again if there is a question asking you to refer to them. Look at the bigger picture, look at the main idea, and second, look at what author feels about that topic. What is the emotion he wants you to have after reading the passage? What is it that he wants you to evoke, right? So that way you will understand that what his emotion about, right? So if you are faced with these kinds of tough passages, stay focused on these 2 elements. It will still give you some degree of confidence with these. Thank you very much for watching the class or for being a part of this session. And do let me know if you have any query regarding any of the terms or any of the questions. I would be more than happy to answer your queries. And please share with me your thoughts and opinion about this session.